You know that feeling when you think marriage will solve everything? When you believe love conquers all? Well, I learned the hard way that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the family you marry into becomes the family that breaks you. This is my story. A story about boundaries, betrayal, and finding yourself when everyone else tries to define who you should be. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, this one's for you. My name is Haley Jenna, and I'm 48 years old now. But this story, it starts when I was much younger, full of hope and dreams about what married life would be like. I met David when I was 26. He was charming, sweet, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and honestly, those were some of the happiest days of my life. He took me to nice restaurants, we'd walk in the park for hours talking about our future, and he always made me feel like I was the center of his universe. His mother, Lucy, seemed nice enough during our courtship. A little controlling, maybe, but I chalked it up to her being protective of her only son. She'd call him several times a day, but David always laughed it off. "That's just how she is," he'd say with a shrug. "She worries too much." I should have paid more attention to those red flags. But you know how it is when you're in love. You see what you want to see. The wedding was beautiful. Lucy planned most of it, actually. At the time, I thought she was being helpful, taking the stress off my shoulders. I was working full-time as a teacher, and wedding planning felt overwhelming. So when she offered to handle the venue, the catering, even my dress shopping, I said yes. Looking back, that was my first mistake. I gave up control without even realizing it. The wedding day itself was perfect on the surface. I wore a dress Lucy chose. Not quite my style, a bit too traditional, but she insisted it was timeless and elegant. David looked handsome in his tux, and when he said, "I do," I believed we were starting our own life together. Our own life. What a joke that turned out to be. The honeymoon was the last time I felt like David was truly mine. We went to Bali for 10 days, and it was magical. No phone calls from Lucy, no interruptions. Just us, the ocean, and endless conversations about the home we'd build together, the children we'd have someday, the life we'd create. But the moment we landed back home, everything changed. We moved into a house just 2 blocks away from Lucy's place. David said it made sense. She was getting older, and this way we could help her if she needed anything. It seemed reasonable at the time. Thoughtful, even. What I didn't realize was that 2 blocks away might as well have been in the same house. Lucy had a key to our place. She'd let herself in whenever she wanted, usually in the morning while David was at work and I was getting ready for school. At first, it was just quick visits. She'd drop off some food she'd cooked, or she'd water the plants I hadn't asked her to water. Then the visits got longer. She'd start rearranging things. "This vase looks better on the mantel, dear," she'd say, moving it without waiting for my response. Or, "You really should keep your spices organized alphabetically. It's more efficient." I tried to be patient. I tried to be understanding. After all, she was my husband's mother, and I wanted us to have a good relationship. But patience only gets you so far when someone's constantly crossing your boundaries. About 6 months into our marriage, I came home from work to find Lucy in my kitchen, reorganizing my entire pantry. Everything I'd arranged was moved. My system gone. "I thought I'd help you get organized," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You working girls don't have time for these things." I stood there, frozen, not knowing how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell her to stop touching my things, to ask her why she thought it was okay to just come into my house and change everything. But the bigger part of me, the part that had been raised to be polite, to respect elders, to never cause conflict, just smiled weakly and said, "Thank you." That night, I told David about it. I was gentle, careful with my words. "Honey, I appreciate your mom's help, but do you think maybe she could ask before coming over? I just feel like we don't have much privacy." He was scrolling through his phone when I said it. He barely looked up. "She's just trying to help, Haley. She means well." "I know she means well, but can we not do this right now?" I had a long day at work. And that was it. Conversation over. My feelings dismissed before I'd even finished expressing them. That became the pattern. I'd bring up something that bothered me, and David would either defend his mother or change the subject. Never once did he say, "You're right. I'll talk to her." Never once did he validate what I was feeling. The first year of marriage was hard. Harder than I'd expected. I'd heard people say the first year is an adjustment, but this felt like more than that. It felt like I was constantly being erased. Lucy had opinions about everything. How I dressed, How I kept the house. What I cooked for dinner. Even how I wore my hair. You should grow it longer, dear, she told me one Sunday dinner at her house. David always loved long hair on women. Isn't that right, David? David, cutting into his roast beef, just nodded. Yeah, long hair's nice. I had cut my hair into a bob just a few weeks earlier. I loved it. It made me feel confident, professional. But sitting there at that table, with Lucy's comment hanging in the air and David's casual agreement, I felt small. I didn't grow my hair out, though. That was one thing I refused to change. But there were so many other battles I lost without even fighting. When I suggested we take a weekend trip to the mountains for our first anniversary, David said we should have dinner at his mother's instead. She'd be hurt if we weren't here for a family celebration, he said. So we celebrated our anniversary at Lucy's dining table, with her in the center of attention, telling stories about David's childhood while I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate. I started to feel like a guest in my own marriage. Like I was just playing a supporting role in the life David and his mother had already built together. My friends noticed the change in me. Sarah, my best friend since college, pulled me aside one day during lunch. Are you okay? She asked, her eyes full of concern. You seem different. Tired. Sad, maybe. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to break down and admit that I felt trapped, that my marriage wasn't what I'd hoped for, that I was slowly disappearing. But pride is a funny thing. It keeps you silent even when you're screaming inside. I'm fine, I lied. Just adjusting to married life. You know how it is. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. And I didn't offer. Work became my escape. At school, I was in control. I made decisions about my classroom, my lesson plans, my students. Nobody questioned me or second-guessed everything I did. I started staying late, volunteering for extra committees, taking on more responsibilities. Anything to delay going home, where I'd inevitably find Lucy either in my house or calling to tell David what we should have for dinner. David never seemed to notice how much I was pulling away. Or if he did, he didn't care enough to ask about it. Our conversations became surface level. How was your day? Fine. What's for dinner? I don't know, ask your mother. That last one I said more than once, with more bitterness each time. David would just give me a look, half annoyed, half confused, and let it drop. 2 years into our marriage, my mother got sick. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and the prognosis wasn't good. I wanted to spend every free moment with her, helping her through treatments, just being there. But even that became a negotiation. You're going to your parents' house again? Lucy asked one evening when I mentioned I was leaving after dinner. You were just there 2 days ago. My mother has cancer, I said, my voice tight. I want to be with her. Of course, dear. I just worry about David being left alone so much. A wife's place is with her husband. I looked at David, waiting for him to say something. Anything. To tell his mother that my sick mother needed me. That of course I should go. He said nothing. Just kept eating his dinner like the conversation wasn't even happening. I went anyway. I started going anyway a lot. Stopped asking permission, stopped explaining myself. If they had a problem with it, they could say it to my face. But they never did. They just judged silently. Lucy would make little comments. David would sulk. My mother passed away 6 months after her diagnosis. It was devastating. She was my anchor, my safe place, and suddenly she was gone. The day of her funeral, I stood at her graveside, numb with grief. David was next to me, his hand on my shoulder, but it felt empty, like he was just going through the motions of being supportive. After the service, at my father's house, Lucy pulled me aside. I know this is hard, dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But remember, you still have a family who needs you. David needs you to be strong now. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. My mother was literally being buried, and she was making it about David's needs. That was the moment something inside me shifted. A small crack in the foundation of the person I'd been trying to be. The dutiful wife, the respectful daughter-in-law. But I wasn't ready to break yet. That would come later. For the next few years, I existed more than I lived. I taught my classes, came home, cooked dinners that Lucy often criticized, and shared a bed with a man who felt more like a stranger every day. We barely talked about anything real. Our marriage had become a routine, a script we followed without thinking. And then, when I was 44 years old, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. We'd talked about having children early in our marriage, but as the years passed and our relationship grew colder, the conversation just stopped. When I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, my emotions were all over the place. Fear, joy, uncertainty, hope. I didn't know if bringing a child into this marriage was the right thing to do. But there was a tiny part of me that thought maybe, just maybe, this could change things. Maybe a baby would bring us closer. Maybe David would finally step up and be the partner I needed. I was so naive. I told David about the pregnancy that evening. We were in the living room, him watching TV, me sitting on the couch with my hands folded in my lap, the pregnancy test hidden in my pocket. "David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." He glanced over, muted the TV. "What's up?" I pulled out the test and held it up. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, his face was blank. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his features. "Really? We're having a baby." I nodded, and suddenly he was hugging me, lifting me slightly off the ground. "This is amazing, Haley. We're going to be parents." For those few seconds, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, connection. Like we were actually a team. But then he pulled out his phone. "I have to call Mom," he said, already dialing. "She's going to be so excited to be a grandmother." And just like that, the moment was gone. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about Lucy. I listened as he told her the news, his voice full of excitement. I heard her squeal through the phone, heard her already making plans, already taking over. "Mom wants to know if she can come over," David said, covering the phone. "She wants to celebrate with us." It was 9 o'clock at night. I was exhausted, emotional, and I just wanted to sit with my husband and process this huge news together. But I knew what would happen if I said no. So I nodded, forced a smile, and said, "Sure." Lucy arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of sparkling cider and a list of things we'd need to do. Baby names she liked. Doctors she recommended. Parenting books we should read. I sat there, feeling like a bystander in my own pregnancy announcement. The next 9 months were a blur of Lucy's involvement. She came to every doctor's appointment, whether I wanted her there or not. She had opinions about everything. What I ate, how much weight I gained, whether I should exercise. "You're eating too much sugar, dear," she'd say, eyeing my plate. "The baby doesn't need all those empty calories." Or, "You should be walking more." My neighbor's daughter walked 5 miles a day when she was pregnant, and her baby was so healthy. Every comment felt like a judgment. Every suggestion felt like criticism. And David? He just nodded along, agreeing with his mother, never once defending me or telling her to back off. The baby shower was particularly painful. Lucy planned the whole thing, invited all of her friends, and I felt like an outsider at my own celebration. The decorations were Lucy's taste. The games were ones she chose. Even the cake had "Congratulations, David and Lucy's grandbaby" written on it. Not my name, just David's. Like I was just the vessel carrying Lucy's grandchild. I smiled through it all, opened presents I hadn't picked out, and thanked people I barely knew for their attendance. Sarah pulled me aside in the kitchen at one point. "Haley, are you sure you're okay with all of this?" she asked quietly. "This doesn't even feel like your shower." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. "It's fine," I lied again. "Lucy's just excited to be a grandmother." "But what about you being excited to be a mother?" Sarah pressed. "When do you get to celebrate that?" I didn't have an answer. The nursery was another battleground I lost. I had ideas, soft yellows and greens, a nature theme with little animals. But Lucy had other plans. She showed up one day with David, and they'd already bought everything. A crib, a changing table, a rocking chair. All in the style Lucy preferred. "Surprise," David said, looking proud of himself. "Mom helped me pick everything out. Isn't it great?" I stood in the doorway of what was supposed to be my baby's room, looking at furniture I'd never chosen, in colors I'd never picked, and I felt something inside me break a little more. "It's nice," I managed to say. "Nice." Lucy looked offended. "David and I spent all day shopping for these pieces. They're top quality." "I know. Thank you. I had some ideas of my own." "Well, dear, these are already bought and paid for. It would be wasteful to return them now." And that was that. My opinion, my vision, didn't matter. It never did. The pregnancy itself was hard. I had morning sickness that lasted all day, my feet swelled, my back ached constantly. I was still working, still trying to keep up with everything, and I was exhausted. But whenever I complained, Lucy would wave it off. "That's just pregnancy, dear. We all went through it. You're not special." The lack of empathy was staggering, even from David. When I'd tell him how tired I was, how much pain I was in, he'd just say, It'll be worth it when the baby comes. Never. What can I do to help? Never. Let me take care of you. Just empty reassurances that dismissed what I was going through. I started to resent the baby. Not the actual baby. I loved my child already. But I resented what the pregnancy represented. Another way I'd lost control of my life. Another thing Lucy had taken over. At 38 weeks, my water broke at 2 in the morning. David drove me to the hospital, and of course, he called his mother on the way. By the time we got to the hospital, Lucy was already in the parking lot. Labor was brutal. 23 hours of contractions, pain that made me feel like I was being ripped apart. And through it all, Lucy was there, telling me what to do, how to breathe, commenting on every decision I made. "The epidural isn't good for the baby," she said when I asked for pain relief. "Natural is better." I was in so much pain I could barely speak, but I found my voice. "Get the epidural." The nurse looked at me with sympathy and nodded. "I'll get the anesthesiologist." After the epidural kicked in, things got a bit easier. But Lucy's presence made everything harder. She kept trying to coach me, kept telling the nurses what she thought should happen. Finally, one of the nurses pulled her aside. I couldn't hear what was said, but Lucy looked offended and stepped back. When my daughter was finally born, Zoe rose 7 pounds 4 ounces. I held her and cried. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, tiny toes, a little rosebud mouth. For one beautiful moment, it was just me and her. My daughter. My baby. Then Lucy was there, reaching for her. "Let me hold my grandbaby," she said, not asking, just taking. I was too exhausted to fight. I let her take Zoe, watched as she cooed and fussed over her, showing her to David like she'd just won a prize. I felt invisible again, even in what should have been one of the most important moments of my life. The first 2 months after Zoe was born were the hardest of my life. Nothing prepared me for how difficult it would be. The sleepless nights, the constant feeding, the crying that never seemed to stop. I was drowning, and I had no life raft. Lucy was there constantly, but instead of helping, she criticized. Everything I did was wrong. The way I held Zoe, the way I fed her, the temperature of her room, how often I changed her diaper. "You're holding her too much," Lucy would say. "You're going to spoil her." Or, "You're not feeding her enough. She's crying because she's hungry." Or my personal favorite, "My David was such an easy baby. He never cried like this. You must be doing something wrong." Every comment chipped away at me. I was already feeling inadequate, already questioning every decision I made. Lucy's constant criticism made it so much worse. And David? He was useless. He'd come home from work, hold Zoe for maybe 10 minutes, then hand her back when she cried. "I think she needs her mother," he'd say, retreating to the TV or his computer. He never got up for nighttime feedings. Never changed a diaper without being asked multiple times. Never took initiative with anything. But he had plenty of opinions. "Mom says you should try this bottle brand. Mom thinks Zoe should sleep in her crib, not the bassinet. Mom says we should start sleep training already." It was always Mom says. Never what he thought. Never what I thought. Always Lucy's opinions, filtered through David's complete inability to think for himself. The comparisons to his nephew started around week 6. David's sister had a son, Tyler, who was now 3 years old. And apparently, Tyler had been a perfect baby. "I used to help with Tyler all the time," David would say, a nostalgic smile on his face. He never cried like Zoe does. "Babies cry, David. That's what they do." "Yeah, but Tyler was different. He was so calm. And he slept through the night at like 3 weeks old." I wanted to throw something at him. Instead, I just stared, too tired to even form words. The comparisons got worse. How Tyler ate better. How Tyler was easier to soothe. How Tyler's nursery was set up better. Never mind that Tyler was a completely different baby, and that every child is unique. To David, Zoe should be exactly like Tyler, and the fact that she wasn't meant I was doing something wrong. Even simple things became sources of conflict. If I took a long shower, maybe 20 minutes to actually wash my hair and feel human for a moment, Lucy would make comments. "That's quite a long shower," she'd say when I emerged. "What were you doing in there?" If I showered quickly, she'd mock me. "Goodness, that was fast. Don't you believe in proper hygiene?" David would laugh along, like his mother's passive-aggressive comments were just harmless jokes. I started to hate showering. Started to hate leaving Zoe's room. Started to hate everything about my life. Postpartum depression hit me hard around week 8. I didn't recognize it at first. I just thought I was tired, overwhelmed, adjusting. But the feelings got darker, more persistent. I'd look at Zoe and feel nothing but exhaustion and inadequacy. I'd think about running away, leaving it all behind. And the scariest part? I started having thoughts about how everyone would be better off without me. How Zoe would probably be happier with Lucy raising her. How David wouldn't even notice if I was gone. I didn't tell anyone about these thoughts. How could I? Lucy would say I was being dramatic. David would tell me I was overreacting. And admitting it out loud felt like admitting I was a failure as a mother. So I kept quiet and suffered alone. The lack of autonomy in my own home became suffocating. Lucy still had a key and used it liberally. She'd let herself in while I was trying to nap when Zoe napped, waking me up to criticize how I'd organized the diaper station or question why there were dishes in the sink. You need to keep a clean house, she'd lecture. A messy home is a sign of a messy mind. I was surviving on maybe 3 hours of sleep a night, caring for a newborn completely on my own, and she was concerned about dishes. But the absolute worst part? David reported everything to his mother. Every single thing. If Zoe had a rough night, he'd call Lucy the next day to tell her. If I seemed upset or tired, he'd mention it to her. If we disagreed about anything baby-related, she'd somehow know about it by evening. It was like living with a spy. Nothing was private. Nothing was just between us. I started to feel paranoid, wondering what he'd tell her next. If I expressed frustration, would that be in Lucy's ears by dinner time? If I made a parenting choice she disagreed with, would I face consequences for it? The financial control Lucy had over us was another layer of dysfunction I'd been too beaten down to fight. Even though David had a good job as an accountant, he didn't manage any of our money. Lucy did. She collected our rent from the house we owned and rented out, a property David had before we got married. She did our grocery shopping, or rather, she gave us groceries she'd bought based on what she thought we should eat. She even controlled when David bought anything. If he wanted to buy something for the house or for Zoe, he'd ask his mother for money. Literally ask. Like a child asking for allowance. Mom, can I get money to buy Zoe those special bottles? Mom, I need to buy new work shoes. Can I have some cash? It was humiliating. We were grown adults, and he was asking his mother for permission to spend money he'd earned. And the truly insane part? We didn't have our own household account. Everything went through Lucy. I didn't even know how much money we had or where it was. When I'd asked David about it once, early in our marriage, he'd brushed it off. Mom's better with finances than I am. She's just helping us save. But it wasn't about saving. It was about control. Even visiting my own father required Lucy's permission. David had made that clear. You should let Mom know if you're going to your dad's, he'd said casually one day. Let her know? Why? So she knows where you are. In case she needs to reach us. She can call my cell phone if she needs me. It's easier if you tell her first, okay? It wasn't a request. It was a rule. And I was expected to follow it. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Every decision filtered through Lucy. Every choice subject to her approval. Every moment monitored and reported. About 10 weeks after Zoe was born, something inside me finally snapped. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, trying to prepare dinner with Zoe in a baby wrap against my chest. She'd been fussy all day, barely napping, and I was at my wit's end. Lucy let herself in, didn't knock, just walked right in, and immediately started criticizing. Why is she in that wrap? Babies need to learn to self-soothe. Why are you making chicken? David doesn't like chicken on Tuesdays. Your hair looks awful. When was the last time you brushed it? I stood there, frozen, the wooden spoon in my hand trembling. Every word felt like a slap. Every criticism another weight added to the crushing load I was already carrying. And then she said it. Honestly, Haley, I don't know what David sees in you. You can't even manage a simple household. If I'd known you'd be this incompetent, I would have told him to marry someone else. Something in me shattered. Years of biting my tongue, swallowing my anger, accepting disrespect. It all came pouring out. Get out, I said, my voice low and shaking. Lucy blinked. Excuse me. Get out of my house. How dare you speak to me that way? I'm just trying to help. Help. I laughed, and it sounded hysterical even to my own ears. You call this helping? You've done nothing but criticize me since the day I married your son. You've made me feel worthless in my own home. You've taken over every aspect of my life. This isn't help, Lucy. This is abuse. Her face turned red. I will not stand here and be disrespected. Then leave. I was shouting now, Zoe crying against my chest. This is my home. Mine and David's. And I'm done, do you hear me? I'm done with you walking all over me. She stared at me, shock written all over her face. I don't think anyone had ever stood up to her before. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood in the kitchen, shaking, Zoe wailing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. What had I just done? The fear set in almost immediately. Lucy would tell David. He'd be furious with me. I'd just made everything so much worse. But underneath the fear was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. When David came home that evening, he didn't even greet me. Just walked past me to the bedroom, his face tight with anger. I followed him, Zoe still in my arms. Mom called me, he said, his voice cold. Told me what you said to her. David, She was crying, Haley. My mother was crying because of what you said. Did she tell you what she said to me? I don't care what she said. You don't get to disrespect her like that. And there it was. The thing I'd always known but had tried to deny. When it came down to it, David would always choose his mother over me. She told me I was incompetent, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. She said you should have married someone else. She's been tearing me down every single day since Zoe was born, and you've never once defended me. She's just trying to help. Stop saying that. I was yelling again, and Zoe started crying harder. She's not trying to help. She's trying to control everything. And you're too much of a coward to stand up to her. His face went pale. Don't call me a coward. Then stop acting like one. When has she said something cruel to me, and you've actually defended me? Never. You just leave the room. You let her say whatever she wants, and then later, in private, you tell me you're on my side. But you're not, David. If you were on my side, you'd prove it in front of her. He opened his mouth, closed it. No words came out. That's what I thought, I said bitterly. I walked out of the room, took Zoe to the nursery, and closed the door. That night, David slept on the couch. We didn't speak for 3 days. On the 4th day, he tried to smooth things over. Mom wants to apologize, he said. She feels bad about what she said. Does she? Or did you ask her to apologize? He didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I don't want her apology unless she means it, I said. And I don't want her coming over unannounced anymore. If she wants to visit, she needs to call first and ask if it's okay. Haley, that's not reasonable. It's completely reasonable. It's called boundaries, David. Normal families have them. He looked uncomfortable, like I was asking for something outrageous. And another thing, I continued, finding strength I didn't know I had. We need our own bank account. I want access to our finances. I want to know how much money we have and where it is. Mom handles all that. We are adults. We shouldn't need your mother to manage our money. This is insane, David. Can't you see how insane this is? He looked at me like I was being unreasonable. Like wanting basic autonomy in my own life was asking too much. I'll talk to her about the visiting thing, he said finally. And the money? Let's take it one step at a time, okay? It wasn't okay. None of it was okay. But I was too tired to fight anymore. Lucy did apologize. Sort of. She called and said, I'm sorry if you felt hurt by my words. Not, I'm sorry for what I said. Not, I was wrong. Just, I'm sorry if you felt hurt. Putting the responsibility on my feelings rather than her actions. But she did start calling before coming over. Not every time, but more often than before. Small progress, I suppose. The visiting my father situation, though, that didn't change. David still expected me to inform Lucy, and when I pushed back, he'd get defensive. It's just a courtesy, he'd say. It's not a courtesy. It's control. But he couldn't see it, or wouldn't see it. Life continued in this strange new reality. Lucy was still overbearing, but I'd found my voice enough to push back sometimes. David was still tied to his mother's apron strings, but at least now I called it out instead of suffering silently. Zoe grew, and she was beautiful. Despite everything, despite my struggles with postpartum depression and the toxic family dynamics, I loved her more than I'd ever loved anything. Watching her smile for the first time, hearing her giggle, seeing her reach for me, those moments made everything else bearable. I started therapy when Zoe was 4 months old. I didn't tell David or Lucy about it. It was mine, something they couldn't control or judge or insert themselves into. My therapist, Dr. Reyna, was the first person who truly listened to me in years. She didn't judge, didn't tell me I was overreacting, didn't make excuses for David or Lucy. In our first session, I cried for almost the entire hour. Just let it all out. Years of frustration, resentment, hurt, and grief. I feel like I've lost myself, I told her through tears. I don't even know who I am anymore outside of being David's wife or Zoe's mother or Lucy's punching bag. When did you start feeling this way? Dr. Reyna asked gently. I had to think about it. Honestly, probably from the beginning of the marriage. But it got so much worse after Zoe was born. Over the following weeks, Dr. Reyna helped me see patterns I'd been blind to. The way David dismissed my feelings. The way Lucy trampled my boundaries. The way I'd given up pieces of myself, one by one, trying to keep the peace. You've been operating in survival mode, she explained. You've been so focused on managing everyone else's emotions and needs that you've completely neglected your own. She was right. I'd spent years trying to make David happy, trying to avoid conflict with Lucy, trying to be the perfect wife and mother. And in doing so, I'd disappeared. What do you want, Haley? Dr. Reyna asked me one day. Not what David wants. Not what Lucy wants. What do you want? I sat there, staring at her, and realized I didn't have an answer. I'd forgotten how to want things for myself. That's when the real work began. Dr. Reyna taught me about boundaries, what they were, why they mattered, how to set them and maintain them. She helped me understand that wanting privacy, autonomy, and respect wasn't selfish. It was healthy. She also helped me recognize the signs of emotional manipulation and enmeshment. David's relationship with his mother wasn't normal. It was codependent and unhealthy. He's never actually separated from her, Dr. Reyna explained. Emotionally, he's still her little boy. And as long as that's the case, he can't be a full partner to you. Hearing it laid out so clearly was both validating and devastating. It meant my marriage had deeper problems than I'd realized. Problems that couldn't be fixed by me alone. Can I ask you something? Dr. Reyna said during one session. Why do you stay? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Because I made vows, I said finally. Because of Zoe. Because I keep hoping David will change. Because leaving feels impossible. Those are all reasons, she acknowledged. But are they enough? I didn't answer. I didn't know. At home, I started implementing some of what I was learning in therapy. Small boundaries at first. When Lucy called and asked what we were having for dinner, I stopped answering in detail. We'll figure something out, I'd say instead. When she showed up unannounced, I stopped letting her in. Now's not a good time, Lucy. Please call first next time. When David tried to tell me what his mother thought I should do, I'd cut him off. I don't care what Lucy thinks. This is my decision. Each boundary felt terrifying to set. My heart would race, my hands would shake. But each time I did it and survived, I got a little stronger. David didn't like the changes. He'd get frustrated when I pushed back against his mother's input. You're being difficult, he'd say. I'm being myself, I'd correct him. Lucy definitely didn't like the changes. She complained to David constantly. Your wife is so cold now. So disrespectful. I don't know what's gotten into her. What had gotten into me was self-respect. And I wasn't giving that up. Around Zoe's 6-month mark, I made a decision. I was going back to work in the fall when the new school year started. I'd been planning to take the full year off, but I needed it. Needed the independence, the identity outside of just being a mother. David was shocked when I told him. But who's going to watch Zoe? We'll find childcare. Lots of parents manage it. Mom could watch her. No, I said firmly. Lucy is not watching our daughter full-time. We're finding a daycare or hiring a nanny. He started to argue, but I held up my hand. This isn't a discussion, David. I'm going back to work, and we're finding appropriate childcare. End of story. He went quiet. I could tell he wanted to argue more, but something in my tone made him realize I meant it. Finding childcare became another battle. Lucy was offended that I didn't want her watching Zoe. I raised 3 children just fine, she huffed. But apparently, I'm not good enough for my own granddaughter. This isn't about you being good enough, I tried to explain, though I knew it was pointless. It's about Zoe being in a structured environment with early childhood education. She didn't buy it, and honestly, that wasn't the whole truth anyway. The real truth was I didn't trust her. I didn't trust her to follow my parenting choices, to respect my decisions, to not undermine me. We found a wonderful daycare with caring teachers and a solid curriculum. Zoe would start 3 days a week at first, then full-time when I returned to work. The first day I dropped her off, I cried the whole drive home. But they were complicated tears, Sadness at leaving my baby, yes, but also relief at having some time to myself again. Returning to work was like coming back to life. I'd missed teaching, missed feeling competent and valued. My colleagues welcomed me back warmly, and my students were as challenging and rewarding as ever. Having my own income again changed things too. I opened my own bank account, something I should have done years ago. Started keeping my paychecks separate from the money Lucy managed for David. David noticed. "Why are you keeping your money separate?" "Because it's my money," I said simply. "I earned it. I want control over it." He looked hurt, but I didn't back down. This was non-negotiable. As Zoe grew and I grew stronger in my boundaries, the cracks in my marriage became impossible to ignore. David and I were like roommates who happened to have a child together. We barely talked beyond logistics. Barely touched. Barely connected at all. The intimacy was gone. Had been gone for years, really. But now it felt more obvious because I was no longer willing to pretend everything was fine. One night, about a year after Zoe was born, I asked David a question that had been building in my mind. "Do you love me?" He looked up from his phone, surprised. "What kind of question is that?" "A real one. Do you actually love me? Or am I just here?" "Of course I love you. You're my wife." "That's not an answer. Loving me because I'm your wife is different from actually loving who I am as a person." He struggled with that. I don't know what you want me to say. I want the truth." He was quiet for a long time. "I love you," he said finally, but it sounded hollow. "Do you like me?" I pressed. More silence. "That's what I thought," I said, standing up. "You know what, David? I don't think you've ever really known me. You married the idea of a wife, not an actual person. And I'm just now realizing that I did the same thing. I married the idea of a marriage, not you. Haley, we can keep pretending if you want. Keep going through the motions. But I'm tired of pretending." I walked away before he could respond. That conversation opened something between us. Not closeness, the opposite. It was like acknowledging the truth out loud made it impossible to go back to comfortable lies. We started arguing more. Not about big things, necessarily, but about everything. Every small annoyance became a fight. "You never help with Zoe." "I do help. I play with her every day." "Playing with her for 20 minutes isn't parenting, David. Parenting is the nighttime wake-ups, the diaper changes, the meal planning, the doctor's appointments." "I work all day." "So do I. But somehow, I'm still doing everything at home too." Round and round we'd go, never resolving anything, just exhausting ourselves. Lucy, of course, thought I was the problem. "David says you're always starting fights now," she mentioned during one of her supervised visits. Supervised visits had become my new boundary. She could only come over when I was home, and only for set periods of time. She hated it. "I'm not starting fights," I said tiredly. "I'm finally speaking up about problems that have always existed." "You've changed," she said, and it sounded like an accusation. "You're right. I have changed. I've remembered who I am outside of this family's expectations." She didn't like that answer. When Zoe was 18 months old, I started thinking seriously about divorce. The word had always felt impossible, taboo. But the more I thought about it, the less scary it became. What was I holding on to? A marriage that made me miserable? A man who chose his mother over me every single time? A life where I felt constantly criticized and controlled? I loved Zoe, but staying in a broken marriage for the kids wasn't actually better for her. Was I modeling a healthy relationship? Was I showing her what she should accept from a partner? No. I was showing her that women should sacrifice their happiness to keep the peace. That mothers should disappear into their roles. That wives should accept disrespect and call it love. I didn't want that for her. Dr. Reyna and I talked through all of it. The guilt I felt. The fear of being a divorced single mother. The financial concerns. The worry about how Zoe would be affected. "There's no perfect answer here," she told me gently. "Staying has consequences. Leaving has consequences. You have to decide which consequences you can live with." I thought about what I wanted Zoe to know when she grew up. I wanted her to know her worth. To stand up for herself. To never settle for less than she deserved. How could I teach her that if I didn't live it myself? I gave David one last chance. One opportunity to actually show up as my partner. We sat down one evening after Zoe was asleep. I'd planned what I wanted to say, practiced it with Dr. Reyna. "David, I need you to really hear me right now," I started. "Our marriage is hanging by a thread, and I need to know if you're willing to fight for it." He shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you willing to set boundaries with your mother? Are you willing to put our marriage first? Are you willing to go to couples therapy and actually work on our problems? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I think you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. My heart sank. David, I just asked you if you're willing to fight for our marriage, and that's your response? My mom's not the problem. You just don't like her. Your mom is part of the problem, yes. But the bigger problem is that you can't set boundaries with her. That you choose her over me every time. That you've never actually stood up for me. That's not fair. When has it happened, then? Give me one example of a time when your mother said something hurtful to me and you defended me to her face. Silence. That's what I thought, I said, my voice breaking. You can't think of one time. Not one. In all these years. I've always supported you in private. That doesn't count. I was crying now. Supporting me in private while letting her tear me down in public isn't support. It's cowardice. And I'm done accepting it. He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't understand why this mattered so much. And that's when I knew. He wasn't going to change. He couldn't see what he was doing wrong because, to him, nothing was wrong. His mother was always welcome. Her opinions always mattered. And if I had a problem with that, I was the one being unreasonable. I want a divorce, I said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. What? He looked shocked, like this had come out of nowhere. I can't do this anymore, David. I've tried. I've compromised. I've bent until I almost broke. But I'm done. I deserve better than this. Zoe deserves to see what a healthy relationship looks like, and this isn't it. You can't just give up on us. I'm not giving up. I've been fighting for us for years. I'm just finally accepting that I can't fight alone. He tried to argue, tried to convince me I was overreacting, tried to promise he'd change. But I'd heard those promises before. They never meant anything. I slept in the guest room that night, and the next night, and the night after that. Telling Lucy about the divorce was something I didn't plan to do. I figured David would handle that conversation. But she showed up at the house unannounced. Old habits die hard. About a week after I'd told David I wanted to end the marriage. She barged in, her face red with anger. How dare you, she shouted. How dare you break up this family? Zoe was in her playpen, and she started crying at the loud voice. I picked her up, holding her close. Lucy, you need to leave. I will not leave. You're destroying my son's life. Destroying this family. This family was broken long before I asked for a divorce. You're selfish. You only think about yourself. What about Zoe? What about my granddaughter? Something inside me snapped. Years of taking her abuse, swallowing my anger, keeping quiet. It all came pouring out. Don't you dare use Zoe as a weapon, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You don't care about what's best for her. You care about control. You care about having David under your thumb, and you're mad that I'm finally refusing to be under it too. I have done nothing but try to help you. You have done nothing but tear me down since the day I married your son. You've criticized everything about me. The way I look, the way I parent, the way I keep my home. You've made me feel worthless in my own life. And I'm done. Do you hear me? I'm done. I walked to the door and opened it. Get out of my house. And don't come back unless you're invited. David will never forgive you for this. If David chooses you over his own child, that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man he is. Now get out. She left, sputtering with indignation. And I stood there, shaking, Zoe in my arms, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. The divorce was messy. David fought me on custody, claiming I was an unfit mother. Lucy backed him up, telling anyone who would listen that I'd always been unstable. But I had documentation. Texts showing how little David participated in Zoe's care. Messages proving Lucy's constant interference. My therapist's notes about my mental health journey and recovery. In the end, I got primary custody. David got Zoe every other weekend and one evening a week. It wasn't as much as he wanted, but the evidence showed he'd never been her primary caregiver, and the judge didn't think that should change now. The financial separation was easier than I expected. Since I'd already separated my income and David had let his mother control everything anyway, we didn't have much to divide. I kept what was mine. He kept what was his, or rather, what Lucy managed for him. The house was the hardest part. It had never felt like mine, not really. But it was where I'd brought Zoe home, where I'd spent nights rocking her to sleep, where I'd finally found my voice. I decided to sell it. Start fresh. Find a place that was just mine and Zoe's. Moving day was bittersweet. Packing up years of a life that had mostly been painful, but also held moments of joy. watching Zoe's room be boxed up, knowing she'd never sleep in that nursery again. But driving away from that house, Zoe in her car seat singing to herself, I felt light. Like I'd shed a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Our new apartment was small. Just 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen. But it was ours. No Lucy walking in unannounced. No David's presence filling the space with resentment. Just me and my daughter, building a life. I painted Zoe's new room in the soft yellows and greens I'd originally wanted. Put up the woodland animal decorations I'd dreamed of. Created the space I'd always envisioned. And you know what? It was perfect. The first year after the divorce was hard. Learning to co-parent with David, who still ran every decision by his mother. Dealing with Lucy's attempts to see Zoe more than the custody agreement allowed. Building a new routine, a new normal. But it was also amazing. I remembered what it felt like to make my own choices. To not walk on eggshells. To parent Zoe without constant criticism. Zoe thrived too. The tension she'd grown up around was gone, and she blossomed. Happy, confident, curious. She didn't ask why Daddy didn't live with us anymore. Kids that young just accept their reality. I dated occasionally, though nothing serious. I wasn't ready for that. I was too busy falling in love with my own life again. Work was fulfilling. My friendships deepened. Sarah became my rock, helping me navigate single motherhood and always reminding me how proud she was of my growth. "You're not the same woman I had lunch with all those years ago," she said one day. "You're stronger. Happier. More yourself." She was right. I was more myself than I'd ever been. Now, at 48, with Zoe at 4 years old, I look back on those dark days and barely recognize the woman I was. The woman who accepted crumbs and called it love. Who disappeared into other people's expectations. Who forgot she deserved respect. David is still with Lucy, figuratively speaking. He lives in an apartment his mother chose, takes her advice on everything, and has a girlfriend who, from what I hear, is getting the same treatment I got. I feel sorry for her. Lucy tried to take me to court for grandparents' rights. It didn't work. The judge said she'd created a toxic environment, and her limited visitation through David was appropriate. I don't hate them anymore. Honestly, I feel nothing. They're Zoe's father and grandmother, and I'm civil for her sake. But they don't occupy space in my heart anymore. The guilt I felt in the beginning, the feeling that I'd ruined David's life, is gone. I didn't ruin anything. I saved myself. And in doing so, I saved Zoe from growing up thinking that's what love looks like. Some people think I'm bitter when I tell this story. They say I should have tried harder, been more understanding, given David more chances. But those people don't know what it's like to lose yourself slowly, piece by piece, until you don't recognize your own reflection. They don't know what it's like to be criticized daily while your partner watches silently. They don't understand the suffocation of a marriage where you're always third, after your husband's mother and your husband's need to please her. I don't regret my divorce. I regret staying as long as I did. If I could go back and talk to that young, hopeful version of myself on her wedding day, I'd tell her to pay attention to those red flags. To demand respect from day one. To never accept being second place in her own marriage. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward. Learn. Grow. And teach the next generation what we wish we'd known. Zoe will grow up watching me make my own decisions. Stand up for myself. Set boundaries. Choose my own happiness. And when she's old enough to ask about why her parents aren't together, I'll tell her the truth. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to love yourself more than you love the idea of making it work. I'll tell her that leaving isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. I'll tell her that she deserves a partner who chooses her, who stands up for her, who builds a life with her, not around his mother's expectations. And most importantly, I'll tell her that she is enough, just as she is. She doesn't need to shrink herself to fit someone else's vision of who she should be. These are the lessons I learned the hard way. But they're lessons I'm grateful for now, because they led me here, to this life I've built, this person I've become, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. If you're in a situation like I was, feeling invisible, criticized, controlled, I want you to know something. Your feelings are valid. You're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. And you deserve better. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. Demanding respect isn't rude. And choosing yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. You are worthy of love that doesn't make you smaller. You are worthy of a partnership that lifts you up. You are worthy of a life where you feel seen and valued. Don't wait as long as I did to remember that. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your story doesn't have to end the way it's going right now. You have the power to write a different ending. Choose yourself. You're worth it.